much, and hello, Iowa. I have been your neighbor for many years, and I have never been here. And I'm really, really thrilled. I know speakers always say that. And the other one I want to say is a big shout out for women in Iowa, because I watched the elections last night, and yay for you. So we're going to really shake it up this morning, and we're going to do something different than I normally do. And normally we do tastings after my presentation so that you can apply everything that you learned to the tastings. But we want you to have everything spot on. So we're going to do the tastings first. Now we need your cooperation so this can all go smoothly. There are 2 tiers and they contain soup in them, so be really careful moving this around. And if one of you can be so kind as to take the first silver tier off, not the pink, at each table. And there's a little soup bowl for each one of you. And if you can each take one of these soups, and there are spoons at the table too, so if you can pass the spoons around. I'd like for you each to be a sport and give this first little soup bowl a taste. And by the way, for those of you who've looked at my handouts and are curious about the recipes are online. So I'll be explaining everything that you're eating later on in the presentation, but please enjoy the first tasting, and it's a country vegetable soup. I'll give you a little time. There's also notepads on every table, and it would be great if you could note your impression about the soup. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What do you like about it? Is it yummy? Is it salty? Is it fatty? Is it flavorful? What appeals to you? What doesn't appeal to you? We're dietitians. We take a lot of notes, so go for it. Talk among your friends, too. Okay, for those of you who've enjoyed the first tasting, for those of us who are in the flavor business, we recommend that you have a little sip of water in between, so there should be water on your tables, and swish it around to cleanse your palate. And let's get ready for tasting 2. Now, tasting 2 is in the pink container. There are soup bowls for everyone again. And in full disclosure, there's a tiny bit of MSG in the second tasting. So for those of you who think you're sensitive or don't want to have it, I'm letting you know right now before you taste. If not, be open-minded and adventurous. And what you might want to do after we're completed with the presentation is go back and taste it. Now before you do that, there's another part to tasting number 2. So you want to taste it on its own and think about it and make some notes again and talk to your friends again about it. And then there are little dishes that contain Parmesan cheese and freshly chopped parsley. And after you've tasted it on its own, add a little bit of cheese and a little bit of parsley. You can mix it up if you like, and then taste it another time with these additions to it, making notes again to see what you think. Does it taste light? Does it taste heavy? Is it fatty? Is it salty? Is it rich? Is it flavorful? Do the vegetables taste different? All sorts of questions you can ask yourself. And then what happens with the toppings on it as well? So I'm presuming you're done with the 2 tastings and then the toppings, and now we're get started. The learning objectives for today's presentation are these. I'm hopeful that you will be able to distinguish among the chemosensory, those are chemical sensory concepts of flavor, taste, and texture throughout the aging. And then apply these concepts to both normal and therapeutic nutrition to integrate these concepts into dietary practices of your public, to incorporate culinary schools for nutritious diets and for therapeutic diets. Very simple skills that maybe some of us did not learn as we were going through our nutrition education. And for those of you who do work for companies, to be able to apply some of these skills to reformulate and redesign products and recipes and menus. And that's what I do when I'm not speaking and writing. So I work for food companies. And for instance, a soup company or flavor companies, and I help them take their products and redo them so that they're healthier and that they taste great too. Because as you know, if something doesn't taste good, people are just not going to eat it. And we want our customers to eat it and be happy and to be healthy. I like to begin by looking at both aging in America and then aging in the world. And you know about bell curves, we've heard them throughout our education. Well, it used to be that the majority on the bell curve were middle-aged people, and that curve seems to be moving rapidly towards the aging population. It's the most rapidly growing segment of the U.S. population today. There are about 40 million Americans who are aging. About 12.8% of our population, or 1 in every 8. What is considered aging? Well, really, after you stop growing, you start aging. So it's not like aging starts at 40 or 50 or 60, but it's usually 50 to 60 or older is when we're talking about the aging population. This is expected to double by 2030. And 1/2 of the U.S. population that's aging will be minorities. And this is really important to us as dietitians and nutritionists in that we're just not feeding people with standard palates. We're feeding people that are Hispanic, who are Asian, who are Middle Eastern. So our population demographics are changing, they're aging, they're used to a different type of dietary, and really we're playing catch-up, if you will, to try to feed them healthfully. Same thing, if not even more profound, is happening to global aging. There's an explosion that has taken place the last century. About 380 million people worldwide are now age 60 or older, and this number is expected to triple. The highest proportion of aging people are found here, in Western Europe, in Australia, and in Southeast Asia. Long list. I apologize always to the people in the back of the room. This is a whole list of diseases and concerns. of people who are aging, older populations. This doesn't mean that someone who's younger couldn't be afflicted by some of this, but you can see that it goes on and on. And for many of us who deal with this, we're dealing with the problem when really the root of the problem may be taste and smell or chemosensory disorders. So someone might have one of these diseases when really it all begins up here, and that's what I'll be indicating to you. According to the CDC, 80% of older Americans have at least one of these disease concerns, and 50% of older Americans have at least two. This is a dramatic effect on our healthcare cost, and major efforts need to be in prevention. When you go to the doctor and the doctor asks you questions about your sight or your hearing, do they ever ask you about your sense of taste or smell? And these are other senses that are affected as we get older, as much or if not more than seeing and hearing. And then there's another sense that we almost forget altogether, and that's our sense of touch. And we're learning so much about texture and how important that is, not only orally, but holding food, and especially when there's a loss of sight, that, you know, having our patients and our clients touch food and understand the different textures in a grainy bread versus a smooth bread, or something that still has the skin on it versus skinless, can make such a difference in people who can't see any longer and have that food memory of how great that texture was when they were younger. So I said that increased longevity brings taste and smell disorders, and taste and smell disorders affect longevity. So it's really very cyclic what we're in right now. And I would imagine that some of you who are excellent tasters have discovered that you're not so good as when you were younger. And maybe some of you had food preferences when you were younger. There are certain foods or beverages that you can't stand that you're kind of liking when you get older. And that's perfectly normal. And once again, the physiology is coming soon, and you'll understand why. The problem is that we've had no measure of this until about 1995, when the U.S. government developed what's called the Healthy Eating Index. And so they began to take a look at the aging population and say, what's the diet quality of this group of 65 plus? And can we begin to make some conclusions about it? And in 1995, the HEI concluded that 13% of the group that was analyzed had poor diets, 67% needed improvement, and there was an increased decline past age 74. And there's kind of mixed messages for working with a group this old, in that some people feel that if someone has quality of life at 74 and they desire certain foods that may not quote unquote fit their diet, then they just should probably go ahead and have them, because it's going to add to their enjoyment as they age. So the HEI was repeated in 2010, and these are the conclusions. Overall, the diet quality of Americans aged 65 and older did not significantly improve than the 1995 conclusions, and that older Americans need to do what we all need to do: increase whole grains, dark leafy green and orange vegetables, legumes, low-fat dairy, and choose more nutrient-dense foods, and lower fats, lower added sugars, less sodium, less saturated fat, what we all know and what we all preach. Now we begin to look at age-related diseases and which nutrients are associated with them. Again, apologies to my colleagues in the back of the room. Some of them calcium and vitamin D, osteoporosis. I'm preaching to the choir here, you know all this. Antioxidants, cancer and heart disease, B vitamins, heart disease and cognition, omega-3s and inflammation, plant sterols with high blood cholesterol. So we're still looking at nutrients in disease as opposed to the foods that they're contained within. And here's another list of others: lutein, fiber, probiotics, potassium, whey, zinc, and coenzyme Q. Well, I've been speaking about the relationship of certain nutrients and diseases and then foods that contain this for years, and never really struck home, because of course I consider myself a super taster. And recently, about a month ago, my husband was given a sulfa drug, Bactrim, and for an eye infection, and had no idea that he was allergic to the sulfa drug. And it really ravaged his system, and it affected his sense of taste. So he drank coffee prior to this, he drank wine, he ate spicy foods. Night to day, no coffee, too bitter, no spicy foods, too spicy, and no alcohol. So he wasn't a happy camper. And this is very, very slow in returning. So I said, not that coffee is an important nutrient, but if you add a little fat to it, it's going to temper the bitter, and you can get it down you. A sweeter wine would be easier for your palate than a dry wine. And so I had a solution to everything, and I thought, there it is. There's the answer to taste changes that have to do with the disease state and nutrient intake. There are many other reasons why the aging lose their interest in food, and one is environmental. So solitary living, food availability, financial changes all affect whether or not the aging can be well fed. Behavioral, depression, indifference to eating, medications to alter the depression, social, marital status, companionship, physical, immobility or disease, and then the bottom line again, loss or smell in taste, and loss in taste or smell. So, without further ado, let's get into a little bit of enlightening physiology here, not the heavy-duty stuff. When we say that something tastes good, we really mean that it's very flavorful. And when I first started doing this, I had no idea that I was confusing the two terms. So that's the message for the day. When you have lunch, you can turn to the person next to you and say to them how flavorful that lunch was instead of how tasty that lunch was. Flavor is made up of all these senses: taste, smell, appearance, and touch. And true taste occurs into the entire oral cavity and not just the tongue. So it's the sides of the mouth, it's the top of the mouth, it's the back of the throat, it's as you're swallowing, it's in the esophagus, it's in the stomach, and the stomach talks to the brain. And all this is happening as you're chewing or drinking, and multiple tastes are coming through. Pretty far out, pretty incredible. And in fact, a colleague of mine, a neuroscientist who used to be at Oxford, has pictures of the brain illuminating with favorable tastes, and then, not so happy with tastes that you don't care for. And these are neurological messages that the stomach is sending to the brain, and the brain is doing these cool things. So the 5 basic tastes are Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and the taste of umami, which is savory. And the taste receptors for umami were identified in the year 2000 at the University of Miami by a doctor by the name of Stephen Roper. And he likened umami as to putting a key into a car ignition and turning it on. Because what it does inside the oral cavity is, with a little bit of umami, everything just bursts with flavor. And we'll talk about umami more in a second. I just want to say that it's not bogus. It's really there. There are umami receptors. And the more we talk about it, you might say, I love those foods. I mean, there are certain umami ingredients that are really my food vocabulary. And there may be some of yours too. In contrast, humans detect about 20,000 odors in 10 intensities. So we can smell more than we can taste. And that's the reason why we really want you to smell your food first and tell your patients and clients to do that. And for those of you who enjoy wine, that's the reason you stick your nose into the wine glass, and take a big whiff, because you're trying to get all the different odors and intensities of the wine. Here's umami. It's no English transition. A colleague of mine, a chef at Kendall, used to call it yumminess. So if you've ever eaten something with umami ingredients, you might say, oh, that's so yummy. It's found in foods that are naturally high in an amino acid, glutamate. And these include green peas, grape juice, grapes, tomatoes, tomato juice, walnuts, especially if they're toasted a bit, seafood, dried tomatoes, because drying really concentrates the umami as well, Parmesan and Roquefort cheese, aged steaks are high in umami. I know we're in pork country, so that would be an umami ingredient, and you'll learn about more and more. It's also found in flavor enhancers, and a flavor enhancer is a substance which brings out the flavor in a food. That's soy sauce, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, autolyzed yeast extract, and monosodium glutamate or MSG. So a little bit of any of these substances in foods can make something taste really yummy. And I want to talk about soy sauce for an example. Soy sauce, you can add a little amount of soy sauce to a pasta sauce. So let's say you're making a pasta sauce and it tastes flat. How many of you have ever tried some soy sauce in the pasta sauce? How about fish sauce? Anyone know about fish sauce? Really stinky. It's kind of hard to get over it. You add a little bit of it and wow, all of a sudden something tastes good. And that's the effect that MSG has as well in the foods that we eat. So it rounds out food flavor. And as I said, we have oral receptors that now only respond to the glutamates in food. This is a picture of infants in Israel, and it's by Steiner, and it's a classic study that's been around since 1957. And there are 5 different rows of infant heads, and the first one is an infant at rest. The second one is an infant given a sugar solution, and you can see that it's smiling and kind of moving towards the sugar solution. The third one is, the second one is water. The third one is the sugar solution. You begin to see the upturn of the smile. The fourth one is acidic. You can see that the baby's turning up its nose. And then the fifth one is bitter, and it's really unhappy and wrenching and spitting it out. So these 5 basic tastes are really present at birth. And if we think about the fact that children display certain preferences as they're being fed, keep in mind then that you are born with a certain number of taste receptors, and each one of these are individualized depending upon the person. Taste buds. We're born with about 10,000, imagine that, taste buds, and young adults, up until, say, 18, have about 250 taste buds within each papillae throughout the entire oral cavity. And the turnover time of these taste buds is about 10.5 days. So if you have really hot pizza and you burn your mouth and you can't taste anything for a while, keep in mind, trust that in about 10 days you'll be able to taste things again. During the decline in taste that I said happens 50-60, this declines to about 100 taste buds per papilla. So what does that mean? That means, in conclusion, that it's going to take a lot more for someone of this age to taste something. And what do people do? They add salt, they add sugar, they add fat, because they want the food to taste the way that it did when they were 18. If you learned that there's a tongue map with specific places for each of the tastes, that's obsolete. So it's not like you taste sugar here, or salty here, or acid here. As I said to you earlier, this taste is all around your mouth. So you want foods that are at the right temperature. That's why we serve this right away, so that you can enjoy it and that you can move it around your mouth. If it's too cold or too hot, you may not be able to make full advantage of all these taste receptors. Super tasters. Well, as I said, I joked around earlier and said that I think that I'm a super taster. Here are the characteristics of super tasters. It's about 25% of the population, and you carry a gene for super tasting. About 2/3 of us are female, and that probably has to do with reproduction, because we're protecting the unborn baby by accepting certain foods and rejecting other foods. About 50% of the U.S. population detects bitter taste. About 25% do not. But this seems to fade over age. So if you're working with a population that can't stand bitter taste, it may happen as they get older and this hypersensitivity fades, that they'll be able to enjoy it as they get older. For example, we know that green leafy vegetables are really important to us, and yet they're bitter. And so there's tricks that you could incorporate with these green leafy vegetables, particularly for people who hate green leafy vegetables and bitter taste, so that it could be more appealing to them as they get older. Once again, a family story. I have 3 children. I have an older son. From the time he was very little, he couldn't stand bitter taste. Does not drink coffee, can't stand chocolate, doesn't like citrus peel, can't put citrus peel on anything. And then bingo, it finally occurred to me that I have a male in my family who's a super taster. Also, spicy food is too strong for him as well. Brand new research about taste cell identification. I believe this is last year. And the taste stem cells have been identified. Their function has not been determined. You know, all this stuff about taste and smell, the chemosensory changes, is pretty new, I'd say in the last 20 years. So the fact that we identified this last year is pretty significant. And if anything disrupts or alters this, say disease or aging, that there can be profound effects down the line. So if there's oral cancer, oral surgery, someone gets hit in the nose and that affects the sense of taste and smell, coupled with aging, you can see how all these different layer effects can serve their course. let's talk about olfactory pathways or the sense of smell. Well, you smell two ways. You smell through the ortho-nasal route when you take a deep breath. And one of the things that I like to do with the soup experiment that we just did is I like to have a cover. I asked for the cover on top to keep all of the odorous smells together intact so that when you have it, that's the first thing that you're bombarded with are the smells. So that's ortho-nasal. Another thing that you could do if you don't have a nice cover like that is you could tense something with aluminum foil and take it off and tell your patient or client, smell deeply before you eat. And then that will, there might be some breakthrough there. The other way that you smell is the retronasal, which is the back of the throat and up. So if you may not like something initially, give it time. It's going to hit a second time. After you chew it well, masticate it well, then you're going to smell it a second time back here. The problem with people as they get older is that they don't chew their food well, or they wash it down, so it's a disadvantage about that retronasal route. Then the scents are sent neurochemically by the olfactory neurons to the olfactory bulb. The problem is with aging and also with diseases such as Alzheimer's is that the olfactory bulb gets moth-eaten wholly. And because the bulb is there to register these scents, it doesn't do its job really well. So then it goes to the cerebral cortex where it's identified. And this process, which works well with people, say up to 18, doesn't seem to work very well as people get older. So, a lot of words here. I will summarize it. And that is that the bottom line says olfactory loss can be potentially greater than taste loss. And the reason is that the olfactory receptors are in a small sinus region in the back of the nose, whereas the taste receptors are all over the oral cavity. And if you don't chew, if you don't smell, if you don't swallow well, you can see how you get a common cold and you're not tasting food well. If you have sinusitis, you're not tasting or smelling food well. I just came back from Eastern Europe Sunday night, and I'm dealing with hotels and airplanes and different climate conditions. And I know that food is, I've lost my appeal to it, and yet when I get back home and I'm adjusted again, I'm hoping all these senses, particularly my sense of smell, is going to kick back in. Also, the types of smells are not uniform. So we seem to lose our sense for sweet and fruity odors first, but musky and spicy odors are relatively stable. Another family story. My mother died when she was 87, and she wore Taboo. Does anybody know or remember this perfume? It's the heaviest, musky, and spicy odor, and she would bathe herself in Taboo, and she was a smoker on top of it. And when you're a smoker, it also affects your sense of taste and smell. And so that to me, whenever I see this slide, I think about she was not interested in those sweet ones, but she went for those heavy, spicy ones. All right, so let's go on to thresholds. What are thresholds? There's two different kinds of thresholds. One is a detection threshold for taste, and that is, oh, I get it, this soup tastes earthy. And then when I say to you, well, what about the soup is so earthy? You said, I can't put my finger on it, but there's an earthiness to it. So a detection threshold is that you can kind of identify the genre that a food is, but a recognition threshold is you could say, it's got shiitake mushrooms in it, and that's what's giving it its earthiness. Now, part of this is skill, for the super tasters here, and a part of this is learned. So for those of you who are in the food field and you have the pleasure of working in food service and working with chefs and so forth, you begin to understand ingredients and what conveys an earthiness, and then you could say, well, it's got carrots in it, but the carrots are roasted. And so the difference is detection and recognition thresholds mean a lot as people get older, and these are some words that you could go back in your vocabulary and use with your patients and clients, because you can say, Mr. Jones, can you tell what you like or do not like about the soup? And what if we substitute a button mushroom for this other funny sounding mushroom? Would you like that taste better? So you can begin to be more specific about your counseling and how you interact. So as people get older, these thresholds get higher, meaning that it takes more and more of ingredients to either detect a food or to identify a food or ingredient. Medical conditions. Whole slew of them are associated with taste and smell disorders. I'd like to talk for a minute about obesity. Very new research within the last year that we are now seeing that the medical condition of being obese may drive our perceptions of the sweet taste. The condition of obesity leads to alterations in the brain and nerves that control the taste system. And we also think that it's affecting the perception of sweetness in obese people's brains. And it also may modify the type of cells and the cellular response that are in the oral cavity. And we think that the condition of obesity may play a role then in appetite and hunger. So it's one more item in your toolkit for those of you who are working with obese clients to say, what kinds of foods are you eating? How are you with sweet foods? How do you feel before and after, and so forth. This and those tasting stem cell research is really cutting edge and something to watch. Drugs we've talked about and how they've had, like my husband's situation, the profound effect on taste and smell. And the average American consumes about 3 or 4 medications daily. Now it's not all or nothing. There are different stages of taste and smell loss, and from mild to severe. But the most important thing about it is, this is a schematic, and it's done by Valerie Duffy, who does a great deal of smell and taste research in Connecticut. And it shows, let me get this working. Here's olfactory dysfunction, which affects one's perception of foods and beverages, which affects appetite and satiety, which affects food selection, which affects nutritional status. So instead of waiting until we're way down here with body weight and all these complications, once again, we need to address the situation much earlier on. Okay. What about stubbornness? What about people who have attitudes about food that they developed when they were younger and they're bringing into adulthood? Well, as we get older, we appreciate more interesting foods, robust flavors of game, of sour cheeses, of anchovies. Maybe we never had that at all when we were younger. But we also have a stubbornness about accepting the newness of taste because we're programmed. We pretty much eat the same foods day in and day out. The adult brain is documented to be less efficient to train with new information like you're receiving today. The stomach is getting smaller. People are easily dehydrated, and I asked for water and juice up here because if you don't have enough saliva, if you're not producing enough liquid to mix with the foods, as older people do not have, that can affect the ability to taste well as well. All right, lots of doom and gloom, and so for the next part of the presentation, I'd like to talk about what we can do about it from a flavor enhancement, from a culinary perspective. These are the ingredients that enhance food flavor. We have extracts, strongly flavored ingredients like garlics and onions and flavorful vinegars, sharp cheese, flavorful oils, concentrated fruit sauces and jams, herbs, spices, dry rubs, sugar, fat, salt, MSG, and wine. I'm going to go through each one of these. We'll start with extracts and flavors. Maybe in your pantry you have vanilla. You may have almond extract. For those of you who use bouillon, it's beef or chicken or vegetable flavor. It's really an extract that's been concentrated in either liquid or powdered form. And these are very useful to amplify our desired tastes and aromas. But there's also coffee extract, there's cinnamon extract, there's peppermint extract, there's almond extract, the list goes on and on and on. And so you could add a savory extract like the chicken granules or the beef granules or vegetables with beef, pork, or poultry, and one of the sweet ones with fruit or gelatin. And let's use a fruit cup as an example. One would not think of pouring a vanilla extract or a few drops of vanilla extract over it and mixing it up. But try it, and also try sugaring the fruit a bit too, because being in the Midwest, you're not going to be at the height of the fruit season, and fruit is going to be pretty plain, pretty bland. A little bit of sugar, a little bit of extract, and then bingo, all of a sudden that fruit salad tastes pretty yummy. The same thing with one of the poultry foods. If, the chicken that you make might be really delicious for you, and you might find that one of your patients or clients is not interested in eating the chicken any longer. But if you make a sauce to moisten the chicken, and you add a little chicken extract to it to really heighten the flavor, it probably has a flavor enhancer like a protein or yeast in it or an MSG in it, but it brings out the flavor of the chicken more. Strongly flavored ingredients. Now you might think that when someone's aging that they can't handle sharp flavors like a little bit of a jalapeno pepper or sharp garlic or a little bit of a tangy vinegar, when really it's just a little that can really make a dish pop. And so some examples are citrus fruit and citrus juice. That's the purpose of squeezing a little bit of lemon or lime or orange over a dish, the last minute, to really brighten it. That's the word we use in the culinary field, to brighten the dish if it's flat at the end. Flavored vinegars, a little bit of balsamic. Balsamic is aged, so it's high in umami. Garlic, chopped olives, onions, ripe berries, fruity wine, sun-dried tomatoes, tangy cheese, a little bit. You might think it's adding sodium. It's adding sodium. I don't know, some milligrams of sodium, but it's making that food yummy. It's also rounding out flavor. So the night that I came home, Sunday night, I had a kale Caesar salad. Kale is the leafy green that's so popular now. And I was so curious because it had a number of these items on top of it with fried onions. on top of the salad. And I thought, well, I could really do without the fried onions. But we have the bitter green, the salty little accoutrement, the fried onions on top of it, and the Caesar dressing. And everything was a really interesting amalgam of taste that created quite a wonderful flavor. And so I thought that was a very clever use of strongly flavored ingredients. Concentrated fruit sauces. As we're moving to Thanksgiving, and it's the ubiquitous turkey, and someone inevitably is not going to eat it because it's too dry, we forgot about it, over-baked or whatever, then think about fruit sauces like cranberry sauce or applesauce or pork with these fruit sauces, but be more mind expansive about your alternatives. Baby fruit purees, which you can find all over now in the squeezable pouches, make for interesting sauces. You can add pureed vegetables with them, and they have a fruitiness to them. So it's orange and apricot, and you could hide some other purees in it as well. It moistens the protein food, and it picks up the taste. Ketchup is a fruit sauce, and there's lots of great recipes, and please write me. I've got 2 recipes that I've made for ketchup, and I'm happy to share with you, and my cards and other information are out there as well. So yes, commercial ketchup is high in sugar and sodium, but once again, I'm saying if you use it as an ingredient to make a meatloaf more flavorful, and that person will eat the meatloaf as opposed to eating it dry, it accomplishes a great deal. Herbs and spices. We have discovered that those who are aging need about 2.5 times the herbs and spices they did as when they were younger. So if a recipe calls for a half a teaspoon of oregano or for basil or marjoram or whatever, and you're making a pasta sauce, and you have the sauce, and now you remember the soy sauce idea that I gave you, is that you need to up the herbs and spices. You need to get rid of them if they're old, and you use the dry in the beginning and the fresh at the end. So you layer. You have a base of dry and then fresh basil at the end. And so, and you need to add more than the recipe calls for. And for those of you who double and triple and quadruple recipes, like we did today, I mean, we served soup for 200, and I made it in my kitchen for 6. You have to remember, too, that as you're expanding recipes, you have to keep tasting as you go and adjusting. So we were in the kitchen, thankfully, to all the staff here who helped us tasting your soups to make sure that they were at perfection. Dry rubs. For those of you who are not familiar with it, there are combinations of herbs and spices, sometimes salt, but you really don't need it, that's patted onto primarily protein foods to lock in the moisture and to increase taste and flavor. And they can replace the liquid marinades that are usually very high in calories. Sugar. Sugar is something that we shy from because we think that, like other carbohydrates, it's not good for us, we're eating too much sugar, it's adding too many calories. Sugar is an ingredient, like salt. And when something's really out of balance, like it's too acidic or it's too bitter, you add a touch of sugar so that it tastes better. How many of you grew up, and I know there's lots of corn produced here, where you sugared the water that you're cooking the corn in, or potatoes, or pasta? Put a little sugar in. It brings out the carbohydrate flavor, the delicious flavor of the bland starch that you're working with. A little bit of sugar. And sugars also measure product readiness. It's a shame to eat a vegetable that's not ready. But we're faced with the fact that we live in the Midwest, and this is the reality of it. So I might use a sweeter marinade. I might use something, I might dribble honey Or I might use agave nectar. When I'm roasting vegetables, let's say, root vegetables, I might dribble a little bit on it. It'll bring out the natural sugars from the root vegetables, caramelize them very nicely. You're not adding a lot of calories. You're rounding out the flavor by using sugar in that way. Fat. Fat is an ingredient. It's not just a piece of butter or sour cream or cream for coffee. It is an ingredient. It has tremendous mouthfeel. It makes food taste good. And what we do when we give out diets is we shy away from fat because we think it's not healthy for us, it's not good for our heart and so forth. But it adds that creamy, luxurious taste, and it has aroma to it too, so we can smell fat. It's linked to fullness, so if somebody has a meal that has fat in it versus not, they might still be looking for more calories afterwards because we've skipped the fat in it. And interestingly enough, again, cutting edge research, fat might be the next basic taste. Lots of work being done on, are there fat receptors in the oral cavity? Right now, we say that there are not, but we didn't know about umami until 2000. So have me back here 5 years from now and I might say, aha, we discovered fat receptors as well. And it's wonderful when you're having bitter vegetables. So last night, my colleague and I had spinach at Pat Chang's, and it was just lightly sauteed spinach with garlic, and it had probably peanut oil. Not peanut, sorry, allergies. It had some type of oil that it was sauteed in, and so it coated the spinach. It had a really lovely mouthfeel, and the only thing that was missing on the dish was a little bit of salt. And the salt really, we sprinkled the salt around and it really rounded the dish. So bitter greens, cooked in a little bit of oil, had the garlic in it for that pungency, a little bit of salt, and probably I should have taken the lemon from my salmon and given it a little squeeze for that brightness at the end. Other ideas of using fat, a little bit of avocado, bacon bits, a little bit of cheese sauce, creamy dressing, flavorful oils, sweet butter, a little bit of it at the end. Salt. Salt enhances flavor. We know we need to cut down and use less, but it does balance those other tastes. So ripe tomatoes. Tomatoes are a really interesting fruit because they have all the 5 basic tastes. Sweet, salty, acidic, bitter, and umami. But if you have a tomato out of season, it tastes pretty terrible. So if it's too acidic, sugar the tomato a bit. If it's too sweet, salt it a bit. And Europeans do a really interesting job of salting the salad before they have it, for this similar purpose to it. Anyone grow up where there's watermelon stands, and before you got the watermelon was salted before you got it, really brought out the deliciousness. I'm salivating now of the watermelon. I want to go back one more time to the use of lemon, and that is the Italians have a dish which is a beefsteak, and what they do at the end is they squirt lemon on top of the beefsteak to bring out the umami-ness of the beef. So I told you that I'd talk about monosodium glutamate again. Here it is. Really frankly, folks, it got a bad rap in about 1985. A physician wrote an editorial to the Journal of the American Medical Association and said that MSG creates Chinese restaurant syndrome. And it never really got out of this bad rap for years. There's been hundreds of studies, literally major studies around the world, disproving this, and yet it still has a bad connotation. That's the reason that I told you that it was in the soup, for those of you who feel that you may be sensitive. Now, if you ate quantities of it on an empty stomach, like anything else, that you may become ill on it, but it's very prevalent in a lot of our foods that are dependent upon flavor. It can reduce a recipe's total sodium up to 40% when it's combined with a little bit of table salt, and you only need a half a teaspoon per pound of meat or 4 to 6 servings of vegetables. It doesn't really work with sweet foods. Wine. Wine is an appetite stimulant. It's also a flavor enhancer. So for those patients of yours that don't mind to have a little alcohol in their meals, it can be used as an ingredient. Now, there are certain wines that are high in umami and some that are not. So if you, like Julia Child, like to make beef bourguignon, which has Burgundy wine in it, and it's cooked for ages, so it's beef with umami, wine with umami, and then you're finished eating it and you say, oh, that's so yummy. And without sounding gross, that's the way that oxtails are, or short ribs. If you love short ribs or oxtails, you probably really like this umami kind of taste. And then there are lighter fish and salads and so forth that are lower in umami. And if you have a big bold wine with a lighter dish, you might turn the wine away and say, this doesn't taste good. And the reason is because it really needs a Chardonnay, something lighter to match with it. So big, bold umami wines, they're generally big red aged wines, go better with longer, slower, bigger cuts of meat. When I say meat, poultry, pork, and so forth. So explore all of your senses, not just your nose, which I said, breathe deeply, take your time and eat and chew your food well. You need to listen to food. Some food has a crunch, some food has a squeal to it, some food has a snap to it. That's the fun of eating, is to really take your time and for people who have lost their sense of taste and smell, is focus on some of the other senses. Long time ago, I used to do heart association grocery store tours, and I happened to do one day for a group of people who were blind and deaf, and I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to teach them about food? And I said, okay, here is a whole grain bread, here is a white bread. Feel the whole grain bread and feel the white bread. Listen to the seeds inside of the melon. This is telling you that the melon is ripe and delicious versus one that's unripe and you don't hear all the juiciness inside of it. So focus more on touch and sound than maybe just taste and smell. Use nice music. And I've tried this unsuccessfully in presentation halls like this. I would blare out Bruce Springsteen and maybe the Chicago Symphony and ask you which is more conducive to eating well. So you go to a bar and they have multiple screens with sports all over it and really loud music. And what do you eat? You usually eat some fun food that goes along with the atmosphere. And then maybe a nice evening out, you'll like a classical sound, and that's more conducive to long and slow. So music sound does play a very important role in what and how we eat. Make sure that the level is high enough, but not too high, and keep in mind that by 2030, 51 million Americans will be hearing impaired. Tactile sensations I talked about. Just remember the picture of the babies and how even during infancy they respond facially to all these different senses of taste and smell. Think about the faces that you make or your family makes or your patients or client makes. And if they're reacting the same way, That's telling you that the next time you make that recipe, that you need to make some of these adjustments here and there so they have a happy face when they're done. Tactile burn. Very interesting concept. Something new again. Think about the change in demographic, that 50% of the population is going to be ethnic. And what do ethnic people eat? Generally south of the border. That's just not Mexico, that's South America, folks. It's spicy foods. Or Far East, Middle Eastern, as they migrate more into this country. So high level of tactile burn. Curry, mustard, vinegar, garlic is showing to be more apparent in food trends, which you're going to see very soon. And what that means is our population is changing in demographics, and we're getting older. And maybe I didn't eat curry growing up. I didn't eat hot chilies. And all of a sudden I'm exploring them, and I like them pretty much. You know, I don't like them being a little bit in my foods, but you know, when it's overwhelming, then that could turn people off as well. Foods with little to no tactile burn, apples, butters, grapes, people tend to like less, or they use more of. So we don't want people to use quantities of butter because of the caloric content of it. So maybe a little flavored butter with some of the high-level tactile burn, like a seasoned or flavored butter, would do best. Okay, flavor techniques. We've got about 10 minutes left. Quality. As much as possible, seek the best quality foods that you can. And if it means going to the supermarket more frequently, buying smaller fruits and vegetables that are more colorful and flavorful, please do. Appearance counts. You want something that's ethnically appropriate. So if you're going to serve tacos for dinner, instead of putting a slice of lemon on the dish, you put a slice of lime because that's more ethically appropriate. When I was at Kendall, we did a study of why college students pick what they do on a cafeteria line, and it's visual. The number one reason why people select what they do is it's got to look good. Otherwise, they're not going to select it. Place foods on set layouts for the elderly who are aging, who are losing their eyesight, so they could go for the same food each time. Color, contrast is important. If everything was white potatoes, white chicken, white cauliflower, white lettuce, they're not going to be interested in food. We're learning that the shape and size and the weight of flatware and dishes are also important. Arouse hunger, I talked about. Tempting foods and then taking the deep breath. Maximize olfaction. Sit around and talk about stories and let people chew. Serving at the right temperature, and activating smell memories. So you walk into a mall and you smell Cinnabons, right? And you want to go right there and buy Cinnabons. Or you're in a hospital environment or a bakery. You go in, there's a bakery that's making fresh bread. And we were at Panera last night, and not only does it look pretty, but it smells pretty too. When you want to sell your house, you bake chocolate chip cookies. Smell memory. The chicken soup that Grandma used to make. Contrasting textures, sizes, and shapes. Vary temperature without overwhelming. Liberalized diet restrictions, like I said. Add a squirt of citrus. Add crunch. Add heat if tolerated. Add spice if tolerated. All right, let's take a look at food trends for 2014. It's happening. We have Brazil, we have chilies, we have Mexican, we have masala. So our country is skewing towards ethnic taste, and we're getting older. Compact cooking, what is that? Well, maybe a stock pot or a slow cooker where everything merges together, long and slow. Remember I told you? Develops the umami in foods and makes it so good. Peruvian, Mexican, Brazilian, Indian tea. These are some of the food forecasters in January of each year. They always look at what's happening. And this is happening not only in our country, but around the world. So, what does this mean for you? Once again, apologies. I've tried this slide a number of different ways. It's a typical cycle menu that you would get in a long-term care facility. And it's pretty plain. It's pretty simple. Cereal and milk and a little bit of fruit, and lunch you have a little bit of noodles, and you have maybe some jello and chicken and maybe some green beans. And frankly, I'm going to predict that people of our age and generation, as we get older, are not going to want to eat like this. So instead, and once again, apologies and write me, and I'm happy to share the cycle menus. This is the same cycle menu, and it's enhanced with some of the ideas that I've shared with you today. Now, you wouldn't want to do all 10 of them at the same time, because for someone who's not used to enhanced foods, it's just going to be too much. It's too overwhelming for them. So my goal is slow and gradual, and introducing a new food as time goes on, much like you feed an infant. So, this is a study that I did with a chef from Chicago at a place called Little Brothers of the Elderly, and it's a national nonprofit. It's committed to relieving isolation and loneliness, and it has special pleasures. It has parties, and they serve food at these parties, and it serves about 1,000 men and women annually over the age of 70 with the average age of 83. It represents Chicago, 41% Caucasian, 37 African American, 22 Hispanic, and 83% women, which reflects the national trend of women living alone. And that's what it looks like. And it's really a fun place to go and be with friends, relieves isolation, and children come, and it's a really celebration of life. So my colleague and I used the soup demonstration that we did today. And we did a before and after, and we took the salt, pepper, and sugar off the table, and we put a doily under the enhanced soup, thinking, you know, we know better than these aging people. So there they were, moving everything around and the doily around, and, you know, horrified. We're saying, how are we going to do this? But we ultimately did this tasting, and we measured food waste, and then what we discovered was a country vegetable soup. We gave them 4 ounces of non-enhanced and enhanced, and we discovered that the participants preferred and asked for more of the enhanced soup, and the enhanced soup was highly preferred by the African American and Hispanic populations. Now, let's take the few minutes remaining and talk a little about this soup. So go back to your notes, and someone be so kind as to raise your hand and tell me your thoughts. Tell us your thoughts about Soup 1, which was the pre-enhanced soup. The soup the way that follow the recipe with the ingredients that are in your handout. Any comments? Come on, we're all students. No embarrassment here. It was salty. What else was it? Oily. Anything else? Starch rich. Okay. Something smoky? Little bit smoky. So the first soup, and once again these recipes are online, had 7 slices of bacon. It makes 6 servings. It had a cup of canned tomatoes, a quart of regular chicken stock, and a teaspoon of salt. The totals for each 1 cup serving were 258 calories, not so terrible, 17 grams total fat, 5 grams saturated fat, 27 milligrams of cholesterol, and 928 milligrams of sodium. All right, soup number 2, the enhanced soup. Anyone want to comment on that? Anyone? More vegetables, had a good color, had a good texture. Anything else? Not as salty, light. What about the fattiness? Not as fatty. And so this is a soup that, based upon the first recipe that I developed, instead of the bacon, I took the bacon out altogether. I only used 1 tablespoon of olive oil. I said 1 to 2. If your vegetables are going to sweat, give off a lot of moisture, you really don't need to. I switched to a quart of low sodium chicken stock instead of full sodium. I used half a teaspoon of salt instead of a full teaspoon of salt. I added shiitake mushrooms, took out the potatoes, which were very starchy in the first, and added shiitake mushrooms to it because of the umami-ness to it. And I added 3/4 of a teaspoon of MSG to that. That's why I said to you in advance that it contains it. So the totals for this are 108 calories for a saving of 150 calories, 6 grams of total fat for a total of, for a saving of 1 gram. No. 11 grams of total fat. 1 gram of saturated for a total of 4 grams, for a savings of 4 grams. 1 milligram of cholesterol for a saving of 26 milligrams, and just 360 milligrams of sodium for a saving of 568 milligrams of sodium. And so what the umami does in the soup, which is achieved by the fresh tomatoes and the shiitake mushrooms and the MSG, is it rounds out the flavor for less sodium, brings up the salt, brings up the natural sodium in the vegetables, provides a more vegetable taste to it, and then you don't get all the fat in it as well. So I was very pleased with the way that the food service made the soup. Now, then I gave you Parmesan and parsley. Any comments? You like it in there? What does the Parmesan do? Brings up the umami. So it's just a sprinkle of it. The parsley is a bitter green. You can add it into it. There's a freshness to it at the end. It's a lightness to it. It's much lighter soup than the first one altogether. And we also did this with a meatloaf before and after. Please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to share the recipes. So the conclusions here is that while these findings are consistent with what we're learning about flavor enhancement, we need to do more. And really, your laboratories are your kitchens, are your food service institutions, are the way that you're dealing with your clients and patients, and experimenting and then investigating how they prefer, what they like. So you can see in this setting of Little Brothers of the Elderly, these are very happy people with big smiles on their face, and that's what we're interested in. Pay attention to flavor intensity, use flavor enhancers, mask any off notes like I showed you how to balance. Use your eyes, things need to look pretty. Address any medical interactions or disease situations. And then these are the places around the world where the aging is so predominant. You really need to, if you're working with any of these ethnic groups, you need to put a little more action into your recommendations for them. Bottom line, no food is nutritious unless it's consumed, and I'd like to add that no food is consumed unless it tastes good. To that end, I decided in 2014, actually it was a 6-year project, that I wrote a book on culinary nutrition, the science and practice of healthy cooking. There's a sample outside in the lobby of the book, and with many original recipes in it, and lots of them use flavor enhancers and deal with the aging exactly like I talked about today. I want to thank you for your time and interest, And once again, have an excellent program, Crystal.